Please watch Part 3 for a better understanding of this novel. Chapter 46: Family and Friction. After the intense investigation into the arson-for-profit scheme, Su Ming finally had a rare day off. He planned to spend it quietly at home, hoping to avoid entanglement with new cases or urgent requests from the station. But, as usual, peace didn't come so easily. The Su family household was in full swing, with each member absorbed in their pursuits. His eldest sister, Su Lian, was discussing a business merger on the phone, her voice sharp and confident as she juggled her career responsibilities. His second sister, Su Mei, the nation's popular singer, was rehearsing a new song in her room, the faint strains of music drifting through the halls. Their mother, the country's top doctor, had just returned from a conference and was reviewing research papers in the living room. Su Ming found himself drawn to the kitchen, where his father sat with a cup of tea, looking over case reports with a focused expression. Their father rarely took time off work, but he always made it a point to sit down with Su Ming whenever their paths crossed at home. "You're a hard one to pin down these days," his father said with a smirk, barely looking up from his reports. "Rumor has it that you've been involved in some rather high-profile cases." Su Ming tried to shrug it off with a lazy grin. "Just doing my part, Dad. Nothing big." His father raised an eyebrow. "Nothing big? I heard about the kidnapping case and the arson investigation. Both solved in record time, thanks to you. You're making quite the name for yourself, even if you don't seem to want the attention." Su Ming chuckled, scratching his head. "Well, if they'd stop dragging me into these cases, maybe I could be lazy for a change." His father let out a small laugh, setting down his cup of tea. "You know, Su Ming, there's a difference between choosing a peaceful life and avoiding your responsibilities. There's no harm in wanting peace, but sometimes, even if you don't seek it, your purpose will find you." Su Ming was quiet for a moment, taking in his father's words. His family had always been an anchor, and conversations like these reminded him of the values that had been instilled in him. Later that evening, Su Ming joined the rest of the family for dinner. The meal was a mix of light-hearted banter and the usual sibling teasing. His eldest sister, Su Lian, couldn't resist a few playful jabs. "So, little brother, I heard you single-handedly foiled an arsonist's plans. Quite the detective, aren't you?" Su Ming shrugged, his expression characteristically laid back. "I just followed the clues. Nothing special." Su Mei laughed, giving him a nudge. "Nothing special? You should be on one of those crime shows." Su Ming, the reluctant detective, has a nice ring to it. He rolled his eyes, but couldn't help but smile a little. These moments with his family reminded him of the life he had now, a life that, despite his occasional frustrations, he genuinely cherished. Just as he was settling in for the night, his phone buzzed with a message from the station. He sighed, reading the details of yet another case. It seemed someone had broken into a high-security vault downtown, making off with several million in cash and confidential documents. The case had already sparked a media frenzy, with headlines calling it the heist of the year. Su Ming stared at the message, a mixture of excitement and exasperation tugging at him. "Well, so much for my lazy day off," he muttered, grabbing his coat. At the crime scene, Su Ming met with the lead detective on the case, who filled him in on the heist details. Security footage revealed nothing but blurred images and distorted voices, and the vault security system had been expertly bypassed. Su Ming inspected the scene, noting the small details that others might have missed. A scuff mark near the vault door, suggesting a tool had been used, the faint smell of oil, likely from an industrial lubricant, and a stray cigarette but in the corner, indicating the intruders had been confident enough to smoke during the job. As he analyzed each clue, he felt a rush of clarity. This wasn't the work of an ordinary criminal, but a group of professionals with intricate knowledge of security systems and evasive tactics. His mind raced through possible suspects, piecing together profiles and motives. The following day, he cross-referenced similar heists from other countries and noticed a pattern. Each time, the same set of clues appeared: distorted security footage, expertly bypassed systems, and similar tobacco brands left behind. This wasn't just a random heist, but part of a larger operation, likely involving an international crime ring. As Su Ming prepared to brief his superiors on his findings, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place, and he was once again drawn into the world of crime solving, whether he liked it or not. Chapter 47. The Vault's Shadow. The heist was like nothing Su Ming had encountered before. Back at the station, he was surrounded by officers and detectives, each pitching theories and analyzing evidence. But Su Ming's mind was already a few steps ahead. Despite his laid-back approach, his genius instincts were in full swing, and the anticipation crackling in the air nudged him into action. All right, so we know the intruders bypassed a level 10 security system, Detective Liu muttered, rubbing his forehead in frustration. But how could they get through all that without leaving more evidence? Su Ming leaned back against his chair, watching as the others debated. He noticed some crucial details they'd missed. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but piercing through the noise. They used the ventilation ducts to avoid the cameras entirely. Based on the residue left behind, they likely applied a frictionless coating to slide in quietly and avoid trip sensors. This heist was too clean for amateurs. I suspect they had inside knowledge. The room fell silent as Su Ming's words sank in. They'd combed over the crime scene for hours, yet he had pieced together the whole entry method in minutes. An insider, you say? Detective Liu raised an eyebrow. We checked the employees. No red flags. But I suppose we could look closer. Su Ming shook his head. Not a direct employee. Likely a contractor with intermittent access to sensitive information. They could blend in and vanish after getting what they need. The detectives around him exchanged glances. Su Ming's insights were proving to be invaluable, as usual. Yet he still exuded an air of detachment, as though he were merely solving a puzzle in his head rather than addressing a high-stakes case. Later that night, Su Ming returned home, exhausted but restless. His family was bustling in the living room, talking and catching up after their busy days. He tried to sneak past quietly, but his mother noticed him immediately. Su Ming, you look like you've been through the ringer, she said with a small smile, patting the seat next to her. Why don't you sit with us for a bit? Reluctantly, Su Ming took a seat, hoping his tired eyes wouldn't betray him. He was used to this life of balancing intense investigations with brief respites of family time. But tonight, he felt the weight of both. Got anything exciting going on at work? His eldest sister, Su Lian, asked, shooting him a knowing look. Or just another routine case? Su Ming smiled, brushing it off. Routine enough. Just chasing shadows and tracing clues. They laughed, understanding his tendency to downplay his achievements. As they continued to chat, Su Ming felt the familiar warmth of his family. It was moments like these that made him grateful for his new life. The next morning, Su Ming was back at the station, ready to tackle the heist head-on. After a series of interviews and long hours spent poring over security footage and cross-reference files, he found the key piece of evidence: a single fingerprint on the vault's inner hinge that didn't match any of the building staff or contractors. It belonged to a known member of an international criminal syndicate that specialized in high-level theft and intelligence manipulation. His mind clicked. The syndicate must be expanding operations into Dragon Country. With this discovery, Su Ming dug deeper into records, linking a string of recent sophisticated burglaries across different cities. Each heist followed a distinct pattern: minimal evidence, identical entry methods, and ties to influential global players. This was no ordinary crime ring. It was an organized effort, spreading like roots underground and connecting across borders. As the day wore on, Su Ming's focus intensified, his mental gears turning as he anticipated the syndicate's next move. He contacted an old acquaintance from his online intelligence community to get additional information. The conversation was brief but insightful. This acquaintance confirmed that the criminal syndicate was, indeed, expanding, gathering intel and funding, and avoiding law enforcement through a web of proxy contacts and encrypted messaging systems. Armed with this knowledge, Su Ming formulated a plan. He'd set a trap, making it appear as though another vault would hold valuable documents the syndicate was after. If his theory was correct, they'd attempt another heist. With calculated precision, he coordinated with his team to monitor the location from every angle, ensuring they'd be able to apprehend the intruders if they took the bait. On the night of the sting operation, Su Ming waited, concealed in a small surveillance room with a direct view of the vault entrance. The seconds ticked by as they monitored every corner, ready for the slightest hint of movement. Just after midnight, the security alarms flickered. Su Ming's heart quickened, and he signaled his team to stay on high alert. Shadows slipped into the vault, silent and purposeful, with the same technique they'd used in the first heist. The thieves approached the safe, their skills evident in every practiced movement. At the last second, Su Ming gave the order to seal the exits. His team moved in, and within moments they apprehended the intruders. The entire operation was executed with flawless precision. This time, no shadows were slipping away. After the successful takedown, Su Ming leaned back, exhaling as he felt the satisfaction of another case resolved. He'd caught more than just a group of criminals tonight. He'd also uncovered another piece of the web connecting the global crime syndicates. His work was far from over, but for tonight, he could at least relish a job well done. As he left the station, his phone buzzed with a message from his father. "Proud of you, Su Ming. You're doing good work out there." Su Ming allowed himself a small smile, replying briefly before heading home. Chapter 48. A new threat on the horizon. The quiet of the night was Su Ming's favorite reprieve from the bustling station. As he left the precinct, his mind was still spinning with thoughts of the syndicate's reach and the methods they employed. While he preferred not to get overly involved, cases this complex drew out his sharp instincts. The morning came quickly, and Su Ming found himself summoned to a meeting with higher-ups. Seated across from his father and the other senior officers, he noticed a subtle tension in the room. The case he cracked last night had stirred up more than he anticipated. "Su Ming," his father began, his voice calm but grave. "Last night's bust was commendable. However, there's something else you should know. The recent string of burglaries seems to have a much broader agenda, one that goes beyond simple theft." A high-ranking official passed a thick dossier to Su Ming, its cover marked with the confidential seal of the country's intelligence division. As he skimmed through it, Su Ming's eyes narrowed. Inside was a file on a particularly elusive criminal organization that intelligence agents had recently linked to several cases of corporate espionage, insider trading, and high-profile burglaries. "Is this the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate?" Su Ming asked, piecing together the pattern he saw in the case notes. His father nodded. "Indeed. They've been increasingly active in Dragon Country, and it seems that their recent operations are all connected to destabilizing influential corporations and financial institutions. Their reach isn't limited to petty crime, but stretches into the highest echelons of power. The Crimson Phoenix Syndicate had a reputation for infiltrating organizations quietly and using strategic information leaks to cause controlled financial chaos, often as a cover for their larger agendas." Su Ming's mind raced, aware of the challenge this would bring. He would need to exercise caution and keep his involvement hidden to avoid becoming a target himself. Later that day, as Su Ming pondered the implications of the syndicate's reach, he decided to seek out his eldest sister, Su Lian. As a high-profile businesswoman and CEO of a major tech company, her insights into corporate security could offer valuable context for dealing with such a powerful syndicate. "Sis," he greeted as he arrived at her office, catching her between meetings. "Su Ming, I heard about your latest case. Seems like you've been busy," she said, smiling proudly as she gestured for him to sit. "What brings you here?" He handed her the dossier, letting her skim through the details. As she read, her expression darkened, and she leaned back thoughtfully. "They're not just after money, are they?" she asked, catching on to the same concern that had struck Su Ming. "No, they're after influence," he replied. "With their reach, they're capable of disrupting entire sectors. If the syndicate can create instability, they can control how those affected companies operate afterward." Su Lian sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Our company has encountered similar issues, particularly in data security breaches that seem to come from untraceable sources. If the syndicate is truly behind it, then they've already managed to infiltrate more than we thought." After a few more exchanges on corporate defenses, Su Ming left, his mind even more resolved. This was no ordinary criminal syndicate. If they were willing to destabilize powerful corporations to further their objectives, then the entire country's stability was at risk. Back at the station, Su Ming began organizing his approach. The case would need delicate handling, as the syndicate's members operated discreetly. They were known for using third-party contractors and pawns, making them nearly impossible to track. Nonetheless, he was determined to make some headway. First, he initiated a search for recent data breaches and unusual financial transactions among local corporations, focusing on patterns consistent with Crimson Phoenix's methods. He compiled reports from multiple banks, analyzing large withdrawals and sudden stock shifts. The data painted a clear, unsettling picture. Several prominent companies had experienced near-simultaneous security breaches in the last few months, followed by inexplicably high stock fluctuations. Armed with this information, Su Ming shared his findings with a few trusted officers in his father's circle. They'd need to work together to monitor potential syndicate moves closely. That evening, as he finally allowed himself to relax at home, Su Ming received a message on his encrypted phone, a secure line he used for exchanging information with his underground network. It was a contact known for relaying information from the international scene, and the message was simple yet ominous. Watch your back. Crimson Phoenix has noticed someone's following their trail in Dragon Country. Su Ming smirked. The thrill of the chase was calling, though he knew the risk involved. For now, he'd keep his investigation under wraps, aware that his ability to solve cases discreetly might be his only advantage against an organization as skilled in subterfuge as Crimson Phoenix. But as he closed his phone, a faint thought crept in. This was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous game. Chapter 49, A Call to Duty. As dawn broke, Su Ming barely had time to savor his victory over the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate's intricate web. The investigation had been exhausting, yet he couldn't deny that his analytical mind found the challenge rewarding. But his brief respite was cut short by an unexpected call. A message from his father awaited him. Report to the Central Military Headquarters by noon. You've been requested for a special assignment. Though his family held prestigious positions, Su Ming was usually shielded from direct military cases. This invitation was different, and he could tell from his father's terse tone that the situation was serious. Arriving at Central Military Headquarters, Su Ming was led to a conference room where his father and several high-ranking military officials, including General Liu, sat waiting. As he took his seat, the gravity of their expressions was enough to signal the importance of the case. "Thank you for joining us, Su Ming," General Liu said, his voice calm yet urgent. "I won't mince words. We're dealing with a case involving multiple murders, each more disturbing than the last. The victims were all young cadets in various military academies, and evidence points to something far darker than we initially suspected." The file in front of Su Ming detailed the gruesome nature of the case. 10 cadets, all murdered within the past month, each under similar circumstances. The murders had stirred public outcry and made headlines, leaving a wave of fear among military families and recruits across the country. "What's the connection?" Su Ming asked, flipping through the pages. The killings were brutal, but something about the pattern seemed unervingly calculated. Each of these cadets was noted to have high academic performance, excellent physical fitness scores, and a drive to serve the country, General Liu replied. "The killer, whoever they are, appears to be targeting promising young military personnel for reasons we haven't yet been able to identify. Your previous record shows you have a talent for tackling complex cases, so we're bringing you in to assist." Su Ming nodded, intrigued. The stakes were higher, and the case's complexity called for someone who could think outside conventional frameworks. He was well aware that if the perpetrator was methodical enough to target cadets, they were likely operating within or near military facilities. "Do we have a profile on the possible suspects?" he asked, scanning through the details for anything that would indicate motive or methodology. "Preliminary profiles suggest someone with deep knowledge of military operations, someone who can get close without raising suspicion," General Liu said. But despite heightened security, no solid leads have emerged. This person is either well-connected or well-hidden. The following morning, Su Ming began his investigation by visiting the last known location of the most recent victim, a bright cadet named Chen Wei. The cadet had been found in his dorm, a place supposedly secured by the Academy's internal protocols. The details were brutal, and Su Ming noted the precision involved. As he reviewed surveillance footage from that night, he noticed the odd absence of certain feeds. 2 cameras positioned outside Chen Wei's room had been mysteriously inactive during the suspected time of death. Tracing the security system logs, Su Ming found what he'd suspected. The cameras had been tampered with remotely. Only someone on the inside could have bypassed these security measures so cleanly, he muttered, his mind piecing together the puzzle. With each piece of information, the profile sharpened. The killer's tactics suggested they were someone with not only military expertise, but also an understanding of how to blend into the environment unnoticed. His suspicions pointed toward a former or current military professional, someone with access and knowledge of Academy operations. The investigation led him to interrogate a few high-ranking officials with unchecked access to Academy databases. Although each interview was brief, Su Ming watched their micro-expressions carefully, searching for inconsistencies. With his experience, he had a knack for identifying deceit, and while none of them admitted fault, a pattern of defensiveness arose from one particular colonel, a man named Zhao Min. The colonel was a strict disciplinarian with a history of conflict with ambitious young cadets. After the interview, Su Ming quietly requested access to Colonel Zhao's activities over the past few weeks, including any personal correspondence. That night, as Su Ming pored over Zhao's records, he uncovered suspicious financial transactions tied to an offshore account. It was unusual, especially for a military officer, to have connections with foreign accounts. The following day, he confronted Colonel Zhao subtly, laying out the circumstantial evidence without accusation. Zhao's stoic expression betrayed nothing, yet a subtle twitch in his left eye spoke volumes to Su Ming. With mounting suspicion, Su Ming approached his superiors and recommended covert surveillance on Colonel Zhao, who seemed to be concealing more than he let on. As the days passed, Su Ming's instincts proved accurate. His findings uncovered that the colonel had ties with a corrupt faction seeking to destabilize the military's morale from within. In his twisted sense of cleansing, the colonel had turned to targeting promising cadets he deemed unfit for service, each victim part of his cold, calculated plan. Zhao was promptly arrested, and with the colonel's confession came an unsettling truth. The conspiracy extended deeper into the ranks than they had initially imagined. As more names surfaced, the case grew larger, uncovering a web of corruption. Su Ming's success in the case earned him a commendation and solidified his reputation as a top investigator, even among the military ranks. Yet, as he returned to his civilian duties, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were still others like Colonel Zhao lurking within the shadows, biding their time. For now, however, he savored the victory, knowing that with each case he solved, he was one step closer to maintaining the stability and safety his family had dedicated their lives to protect. Chapter 50. A Family Reunion Under Lantern Light. With the high-profile military case behind him, Su Ming looked forward to a rare reprieve. It was the eve of one of Dragon Country's most cherished festivals, an annual celebration that brought families together under lantern-lit skies. The city buzzed with energy, and even the usually reserved Su family felt the excitement. The sprawling family estate was alight with vibrant decorations. Red lanterns and golden ornaments adorned the halls, and a savory aroma wafted from the kitchen, where the family chefs prepared traditional dishes. This year, Su Ming's grandparents had insisted on gathering everyone under one roof, calling for a true family reunion. Su Ming arrived at the estate, his attire a traditional robe in deep blue, embroidered subtly with gold, an homage to his family's legacy. As he stepped inside, the warm chatter of his relatives filled the air. In the central room, his grandmother, the country's most renowned forensic expert, greeted him with a warm embrace. "Our youngest investigator has arrived," she said with a proud smile. "How you've grown, Minger. Now, try not to make everyone's head spin with your cleverness tonight." Su Ming chuckled, feeling a rare sense of comfort among his family. He caught sight of his grandfather, the family patriarch, and a celebrated army commander, who nodded approvingly from across the room. Despite his years of service, The elder Su still carried himself with strength and discipline, his presence commanding respect without a word. Before Su Ming could move further into the room, a chorus of young voices rang out. His nieces and nephews swarmed him, their curious faces looking up in awe. "Uncle Ming, tell us about the big case. Is it true you caught a bad guy in the army?" One of his nephews asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Su Ming knelt down to their level, giving a reassuring smile. "Let's keep that story for later," he said, tousling their hair. "Tonight is about family and celebration, not work." As the evening progressed, the family gathered around the large banquet table, sharing dishes laden with symbolic foods. Fish for prosperity, dumplings for wealth, and rice cakes for advancement. Su Ming found himself seated between his parents, who rarely had time for family gatherings due to their demanding careers. "Su Ming," his father began, his tone both proud and probing. "I've heard you've been handling yourself well in your investigations. The entire city speaks of your recent success." Su Ming nodded, humble yet aware of his accomplishments. "It's been busy, to say the least, but it's fulfilling work." His mother, ever attentive, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Just don't forget to take care of yourself, Minger. You're still young, and there's a whole life outside of your cases." The evening drifted into warm family tales and laughter, stories of childhood antics and family legends. Su Ming's uncles shared tales of their days in law enforcement and military service, each story brimming with a mix of humor and wisdom. Later, the family gathered outside in the garden to release lanterns. The night sky, clear and vast, was dotted with hundreds of softly glowing lanterns, each one carrying a wish or a memory. As Su Ming released his lantern, he took a quiet moment to reflect on his unusual path, an old soul in a young body, given a chance to start anew. His wish was simple: to keep his family safe, to protect them as they had protected him. The sight of his grandparents standing together, hands entwined as they released their lantern, filled him with a rare contentment. This was what he fought for, the heart of his purpose. As the evening wound down, Su Ming caught his eldest sister's eye. She, the accomplished businesswoman, smiled knowingly at him. "You know, Ming, everyone in the family has high hopes for you, but they also know you're more than capable of handling anything that comes your way." Su Ming felt the weight of her words and nodded. For tonight, he allowed himself to relax, to feel part of this family he'd come to cherish deeply. The festival's closing filled him with renewed resolve. Tomorrow, he would return to his cases, his investigations, and the hidden dangers that shadowed his life. But tonight, he was simply Su Ming, brother, son, grandson, and, most importantly, part of a family bound by love and loyalty. Chapter 51, A Bloody Clue. After the warm reunion, Su Ming returned to his usual schedule, ready to tackle any cases that came his way. As he settled into his desk, a file arrived, slid over by a colleague with a grim expression. Su Ming raised a brow, quickly noticing the words "urgent," "unsolved murder" stamped across the file's top. Flipping it open, his eyes scanned the details. A gruesome murder had taken place the previous night in a quiet residential area, claiming the lives of two young adults. The victims, both in their early 20s, had been discovered with similar markings on their arms, a string of numbers and symbols carved into their skin. "Serial killer?" Su Ming muttered, his voice low as he noted the strange patterns. It didn't resemble any typical robbery or revenge killing. His colleague, Detective Zhang, shook his head. "No other cases like this recently. But these symbols, they look ritualistic, almost like a code." Su Ming's mind began working, the gears turning with ease. "Has forensics looked at the carving patterns?" "Yes," Zhang replied. "They're working on deciphering it, but you know how slow the process can be." Su Ming flipped to the crime scene photos. The positioning of the bodies and the precise carvings hinted at something personal, premeditated. His eyes narrowed as he analyzed the intricate symbols once more, catching a minor detail the other investigators seemed to overlook: a subtle curve at the end of one of the symbols. It struck him. "This isn't a symbol, it's a sequence," Su Ming murmured. "Almost like coordinates or a code. If that's the case, it could be the killer's calling card, something he plans to repeat." Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat, signaling to Zhang. "Get the team ready. We need to investigate this crime scene again. There's something more to these markings, and I don't think we'll find it from just these photos." At the scene, the atmosphere was heavy with the stench of blood and lingering traces of fear. The once cozy home felt icy and hollow. Su Ming's sharp gaze swept across the room, each object, each stain, each disrupted piece of furniture under scrutiny. He observed the victim's belongings, books, photos, jewelry, all carefully left in place except for a single photo missing from a frame. Zhang watched Su Ming's every move. "Notice something?" "Yes," Su Ming replied, crouching near one of the markings on the floor. "The killer has a purpose in his display. This isn't just murder. It's a message intended for someone specific." He rose and continued his examination until his eyes landed on a small stain of red along the edge of a bookshelf. It wasn't blood. It looked like red paint. "Someone's leaving clues," Su Ming said aloud, more to himself. He crouched, collecting a sample to send to the forensics lab later. Red paint, symbols, and specific positioning. Whoever's behind this might have ties to organized crime or something deeper. His mind flashed back to his network of international contacts, and he made a mental note to reach out to them. Hours later, Su Ming was back at the station, piecing together the scene with maps and diagrams. The details aligned too perfectly for mere coincidence. As he connected the dots, he realized that the symbols weren't just coordinates or messages. They were linked to an old, unsolved case from several years prior. "Zhang, can you pull the files from the Black Dragon Syndicate case? There's something familiar here." Zhang's eyebrows rose. "You think this murder is tied to the Black Dragon Syndicate? They haven't been active in years. Perhaps they're making a comeback," Su Ming replied, his voice measured but thoughtful. "Or someone new is reviving their methods. Either way, we'll need more eyes on this, especially if it connects to past cases." After another hour of analysis, Su Ming left the station late in the evening. As he walked through the quiet streets, his mind turned over the case details, lingering on the syndicate's past. Their influence had been brutal in its heyday, leaving a trail of unsolved crimes and shattered lives in its wake. The possibility of their resurgence added a layer of urgency. He couldn't help but feel the quiet tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that always accompanied his investigations. As much as he wanted to retreat into a lazy, easygoing life, cases like these reminded him that his mind was as sharp as ever, and perhaps, even in his reluctance, his instinct was drawing him back in. He returned home to an empty apartment, settling in to review the files he had taken with him, the city lights casting shadows over his notes. A strange determination burned within him. He knew this case could be significant, something more than just another murder investigation. Tomorrow, he would follow the trail and continue the chase, his instincts sharper than ever. Chapter 52. A Mysterious Pattern. The next morning, Su Ming arrived at the station, the clues from last night's case swirling in his mind. The strange symbols, the precision of the murders, and the red paint stain, it all hinted at something far beyond a simple crime of passion or vengeance. He settled into his chair, already skimming through the files from the Black Dragon Syndicate case. Though dormant for years, the Syndicate's legacy seemed to echo within the recent murders. Detective Zhang entered, handing him a fresh report. The red paint sample analysis came back. It's a unique shade not found in typical commercial stores. It's used for marking restricted areas in high-security sites, government facilities, or military installations. "Maybe interesting," Su Ming muttered, tapping a pen against the report. "Whoever left it behind has access to high-security resources. Either they're connected to powerful players, or they want us to think they are." He continued reading, his gaze occasionally flickering to the crime scene photos. Each detail seemed designed to send a message, but decoding it required more information. He decided it was time to loop in his network of contacts, a discreet community of intelligence experts and investigators from around the world who shared information on enigmatic cases. Late in the afternoon, he entered a quiet cafe to access a secure laptop. His contact, Jade Raven, was based overseas, specializing in criminal networks and hidden intel. As he messaged her, his fingers tapped quickly across the keyboard. Su Ming, have you seen any recent patterns or resurfaces of the Black Dragon Syndicate signature? We have a murder here with eerily familiar symbols. Minutes later, a reply came. Jade Raven. Nothing on Black Dragon specifically, but I've seen symbols resembling those. They were in a report connected to some underground intelligence network, something you'd know about. Is there any chance these murders might connect to something beyond local organized crime? Su Ming considered her question. Perhaps, he typed back. Could be a setup or a revival attempt. If you hear anything more, keep me updated. After a few more exchanges, he returned to the station. His mind lingered on Jade Raven's words. The notion that these symbols might connect to an intelligence network, or worse, an underground group aiming to infiltrate key government sectors, sparked a new line of inquiry. As he returned to his desk, Zhang approached him. Su, you know how we looked into that red paint? Guess what? It's used on military bases, specifically around storage facilities. The question is, how did it end up on our crime scene? Su Ming thought it over, his mind racing. If we assume this is the work of someone trying to send a message, then the military connection is deliberate. They're directing our attention to restricted areas, but that only means they're either taunting us or covering their tracks. So, what's the next step? Zhang asked. We find out which facilities use that specific paint around the capital. Su Ming replied, determination settling in. Someone out there wants to create a pattern, and we'll figure out what it is. Su Ming spent the evening poring over reports, his desk covered in files as he sought connections between the symbols, the paint, and past criminal activity. His mind drifted to his family, the usual concerns of a detective balanced by the occasional tug toward normalcy. He hadn't had a proper meal with them in ages, nor had he spent much time with his sisters since they'd all started their own careers. Lost in thought, he barely registered Zhang calling out, Su, take a break. You're here more than the cleaning crew. But Su Ming simply waved him off, his mind focused on the task at hand. Chapter 53. Closing in on the clues. The next day dawned with Su Ming deep into the evidence, his hands moving briskly over reports and images of the crime scenes. Despite his attempts to steer clear, the case now clung to him as if woven into his fate. Each symbol, each strange clue begged to be unraveled, a challenge the lazy genius couldn't resist. Just as he pieced together a potential lead, his phone buzzed. It was Zhang, his voice urgent. Su, we have another murder. Same M.O., same symbols. The body was found in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts. Su Ming exhaled, sensing a pattern. These cases weren't isolated. They were deliberate, possibly planned with military precision. He hurried to the scene, arriving to see the usual yellow tape stretched around the old, derelict warehouse. Inside, the scene was all too familiar. The victim lay in a calculated position, arms spread, with the same symbols etched in red paint around them. The unsettling familiarity gnawed at him. He spotted a faint trail of footprints leading to the back, partially covered in dirt and grime. Su Ming studied the footprints. These look like military-grade boots, he muttered, noting the sole pattern. His mind churned. If his guess was right, the killer had left yet another breadcrumb, either daring them to follow or setting a meticulous trap. Zhang appeared beside him, rubbing his forehead in frustration. Another one, Su. We've got to find a lead that brings us closer, not more riddles. Su Ming scanned the room, noting every detail. This isn't just a crime, it's a carefully orchestrated message. Every symbol, every clue has a purpose. Our killer wants us to see these patterns, to make us follow them. Zhang's brows knitted. But why? If he's leaving so much behind, maybe he wants to be caught, or wants us to get caught up in his game. Su Ming replied, a grim smile touching his lips. There's more to this than just sending a message. He's creating an experience, dragging us along with him. They returned to the station, each haunted by the killer's cryptic intentions. Su Ming mulled over the evidence, his thoughts drifting toward his family. Perhaps his sister, the skilled hacker, might have some insight into these symbols. She had her web of contacts and resources that could be useful in deciphering the patterns. As much as he preferred to keep his cases separate from his family, the complexity of this one was an exception. After a quick call to his sister, she agreed to look into any similar symbol patterns found in restricted areas or old case files. Though she was curious about the case, he gave only the bare essentials, careful to keep her out of the investigation's risks. A few hours later, Zhang approached, a hint of excitement in his voice. "We traced the paint. It's used in storage and weapons facilities, specifically older, less guarded ones on the outskirts." Su Ming's eyes lit up, the puzzle pieces aligning. "So we're dealing with someone who has inside knowledge about these areas or someone who can access restricted military zones. But why target civilians and leave military clues?" Zhang shrugged. "Maybe he's covering his tracks with misdirection. Someone skilled in military tactics, but with no official connections anymore." Su Ming pondered this. Could be someone with a grudge against both the police and the military. Perhaps someone aiming to send a pointed message. As the day wound down, Su Ming couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to the heart of the matter. The case was no longer just a mystery. It was becoming personal, a twisted dance that he couldn't break free from. Chapter 54. A break in the pattern. The next morning, Su Ming arrived at the station to a frenzy of activity. Zhang rushed over, holding a new report with a hint of urgency. "Su, there's been a break. The military has granted us access to restricted archives. We've got files on unsolved cases from a decade ago, with similar patterns, symbolic markings, precise placements, though no one ever connected the dots back then. They think this might be the same person or someone mimicking an old killer." Su Ming's curiosity was piqued. He knew this killer wasn't simply following a pattern for attention. There had to be a deeper motive. Accessing the files could give him insight into the killer's past movements, his methods, and perhaps even his identity. They decided to visit the military facility immediately. Arriving at the secure archives, Su Ming and Zhang were led into a dimly lit room where a stack of thick, weathered folders awaited them. Su Ming began flipping through the pages, each case eerily similar to what they had encountered recently. Symbolic markings, precise yet haunting positioning of victims, and an unsettling lack of concrete evidence. One file, however, caught his attention. A case from 15 years ago involved a former soldier named Zhao Lei who had been discharged under suspicious circumstances. Known for his tactical brilliance, Zhao had been involved in covert missions but was ultimately dismissed after an investigation linked him to rogue activities abroad. The pattern of his actions mirrored that of their current suspect: methodical, calculated, and psychologically manipulative. "Zhao Lei," Su Ming muttered, committing the name to memory. "If it's him, he's probably out there hiding in plain sight, moving strategically around us." Zhang leaned over, scanning the file. "It says he was last seen in Longchen a few years ago, but dropped off the radar since then. Could he be behind these new killings?" "Possibly," Su Ming replied, his mind racing. "The markings and the military-style precision make sense if it's him. But why reappear now after all these years? What's changed?" Later that evening, Su Ming sat alone at his desk, sifting through the latest reports from the forensics team. A list of possible weapons used, soil samples from the recent crime scene, even a partial shoe print. All data pointed to someone with an extreme level of preparedness. If it was Zhao, he was leaving just enough clues to stay in control, as though reliving his past victories. Zhang entered, handing Su Ming a cup of coffee. "You're thinking he's making this a challenge, aren't you?" Su Ming nodded. "It's the way he's setting the scenes. He's not just killing. He's arranging and orchestrating. It's a game to him. He wants us to follow his trail. But what's the endgame? Just to prove he can?" Zhang asked. "Perhaps, but there's something deeper here. The reappearance after a decade means this is personal. He's taunting us, specifically the police. He wants us on edge, desperate for a misstep." Just as they were discussing, a call came through on Su Ming's phone. It was his sister, her tone uncharacteristically serious. "Su, I did a deep dive on those symbols you sent. I think they're linked to an old covert project known only to high-ranking officials in the military. The project was disbanded years ago, and most records are sealed. But if Zhao Lei had any part in that, this case might have roots in something bigger than we realized." Su Ming took a slow breath, processing the new information. "Thanks. You did well. Just stay safe, okay?" After hanging up, he looked over at Zhang. his face hardening. This isn't just a string of murders. It's a vendetta. And Zhao Lei's using the crimes as a way to send a message. We're in his sights now, and he's waiting for us to make the next move. As they drove back, Su Ming's mind raced, piecing together the scattered elements of the case. He knew that if Zhao Lei was truly behind this, the former soldier would strike again. Only this time, his target might be much closer. The hunt had officially turned, and the predator was now in their sights. Chapter 55. The trap is set. Su Ming sat in his office the following morning, surrounded by files and notes. Every case from the past that matched their current one had a particular rhythm. Symbols etched into walls, a distinct layout of objects around the victims, and precision in each detail, as if calculated by a mastermind. Zhao Lei's profile was methodical, brilliant but ruthless, and now it seemed he was playing with them. Zhang knocked lightly, stepping in with a tense expression. "The commissioner wants to see you. There's been another development." Su Ming nodded, grabbing his notepad as they made their way down the corridor. He couldn't shake the feeling that Zhao Lei wanted him involved, drawn deeper into the case with each turn. It was as if the killer was leading him somewhere deliberately, step by step. The commissioner's office was filled with a sense of urgency. On his desk lay a new case file, the seal still fresh. The commissioner motioned for Su Ming and Zhang to sit, his voice low and grave. "Another murder. This time, the victim is an off-duty military officer. The scene is identical, right down to the symbolic markings." Su Ming frowned, already anticipating the details. Were there any additional clues left behind? The commissioner handed him the file. "Just one thing. This time, there was a note left on the victim, addressed to you." Zhang's eyes widened. "This is personal now." Su Ming took the note, his gaze narrowing. The message was simple but chilling. "Catch me if you can, Su Ming." He set the note down, his mind racing. Zhao Lei was watching him closely, aware of his every move. The taunt was a calculated risk. Zhao Lei wanted him to follow, to play this dangerous game. "Zhao is luring me," Su Ming said finally. "Each of these murders, these carefully placed symbols, they're all meant to pull me deeper. He wants to test me?" The commissioner's face hardened. "Then you'll be our lead on this case, Su. Assemble a team and do what you need. We need him off the streets before this escalates further." Back at his desk, Su Ming assembled the team, briefing them with precision. His instructions were clear. Everyone needed to treat this with utmost caution. Zhao Lei was calculating and deeply versed in military tactics. Any misstep could cost them dearly. Zhang studied the new file intently. He's left behind another partial shoe print, and the soil analysis from the last crime scene showed traces of a rare mineral, something that's only found in a few places across the city. Su Ming's mind worked quickly, which means he's hiding somewhere close to one of those areas. Let's narrow it down. If we can pinpoint his movement pattern, we might be able to predict his next step. They began scouring maps of the city, locating the areas with that specific mineral. There were only 3: an industrial district, a military supply depot, and an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts. "I'll take a team to the warehouse district," Zhang volunteered. "It's the perfect place for someone trying to stay under the radar." Su Ming agreed. "I'll head to the industrial district. Let's coordinate with the teams and check every lead." Arriving at the industrial district, Su Ming and his unit combed through each building methodically. As he moved through the dimly lit corridors, he couldn't shake the sense that Zhao Lei was watching, waiting for his next move. Then, in a quiet corner of one of the buildings, he found something, an old military patch with Zhao Lei's unit insignia. Su Ming's pulse quickened. It was a breadcrumb, deliberately left behind, just like the note. He radioed Zhang. "I've got something here." It's a sign that he was nearby. "How's the search on your end?" Zhang's voice crackled back. "Nothing yet, but we're still combing through the warehouses. If he set up a hideout, he's done a good job covering his tracks." "Stay sharp," Su Ming replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. He knew Zhao Lei wouldn't be easy to corner, and that made him all the more dangerous. Hours passed as they continued their search, but it yielded no sign of Zhao Lei. Back at headquarters, Su Ming reviewed everything once again, his mind piecing together fragments of information. Zhao was daring him to find him, to confront him directly. But Su Ming had to be smarter and had to find the weak point in Zhao's game. Finally, an idea struck him. Zhao Lei's precision and methodical nature could be his undoing. If Zhao thrived on control, any unpredictability might throw him off. Su Ming needed to set a trap, one that Zhao Lei wouldn't expect. The following day, Su Ming gathered his team and outlined his plan. We're going to leak false information about an upcoming military operation in Longshan. Zhao Lei's previous attacks have been targeted, and if he's watching us, he'll take the bait. They set the plan into motion, planting subtle clues about the supposed operation. The next few days were tense, the team on high alert, waiting for Zhao Lei to make a move. Then, late one night, their efforts paid off. A figure was spotted near the military supply depot, moving with the calculated stealth of a trained operative. Su Ming and Zhang, positioned nearby, watched as the figure approached the building, unaware that they were waiting. Now, Su Ming whispered. The team moved swiftly, cutting off all exits. Zhao lay caught off guard, attempted to fight back, but his escape routes were sealed. Realizing he was trapped, he surrendered his expression to a mix of frustration and dark amusement. As they led him away, Zhao met Su Ming's gaze, a twisted smile on his face. You're just as sharp as I heard, Su Ming. But this isn't over. You and we're not done yet. Su Ming watched him, unflinching. It's over for now, Zhao. And this time, you won't be getting away. The case had concluded, but Su Ming knew it was only a temporary victory. Zhao Lei would be in custody, but his presence would continue to cast a shadow over them. For now, though, Longshan could rest a little easier, and Su Ming's pursuit had proven once again that his instincts were unerring, even in the face of the most ruthless adversaries. Chapter 56, A Moment of Rest and Reflection. The tension in Longshan subsided with Zhao Lei's capture, yet Su Ming could not shake the feeling that a storm was still brewing. His instincts told him that Zhao was part of a larger network, one that had its roots deep within the city. For now, however, the case was officially marked as solved. The entire team had earned a well-deserved break. After a long week, Su Ming returned home, greeted by the warm familiarity of his family. His grandmother had cooked a feast, and his 7 sisters had come together, each with something prepared. His father was proud, but even he, the chief of criminal police, had a rare smile on his usually stern face. As they settled around the table, his youngest sister, Mei, leaned over with a grin. I heard you solved one of the toughest cases recently. Tell us how you managed it. Su Ming shrugged, maintaining his usual laid-back demeanor. It was just another case. Nothing too challenging, he said, but his slight smirk hinted otherwise. The family shared a laugh, knowing that his humility was part of his charm. They knew how brilliant he was, yet how effortlessly he concealed it. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, away from crime and danger. For a few hours, Su Ming felt like a normal young man, surrounded by family instead of case files. The next morning, however, work called him back, and this time it was different. A series of burglaries had been reported in affluent neighborhoods. The burglar was meticulous, leaving no prints and only taking select items. The odd part? Each victim reported a strange symbol left behind in their homes, different from Zhao Lei's markings but still unusual enough to catch Su Ming's attention. He arrived at the scene of the latest burglary, accompanied by Zhang and a few other officers. They examined the home, and Su Ming immediately noticed how precise the theft had been. Only the most valuable pieces were missing, but they were chosen in such a way that it would take days for the owners to even notice. Zhang pointed to a small note left behind, scrawled with the symbol they'd seen on the earlier cases. Whoever this is, they're taunting us? Su Ming nodded, his eyes narrowing as he studied the scene. This isn't just burglary. This is planned. Each object taken is part of a pattern, one that's meant to send a message. They spent the next few hours analyzing the stolen items, trying to discern a common thread. As Su Ming reviewed the case files, he noticed something subtle but telling. Each home belonged to individuals connected to government positions or prestigious roles. These weren't random targets. They were people of influence. The pieces fell together in his mind. This wasn't a simple burglary spree. It was a message aimed at those in power. But why? As the investigation continued, Su Ming set a quiet trap. He predicted the next target, based on the list of connections he'd identified, and planned a discreet surveillance operation around the next likely house. It was a calculated risk, but one he felt confident in taking. Late that night, as the team lay in wait, a shadow moved near the targeted home. Su Ming watched closely, signaling for silence. The figure approached the house with careful precision, tools ready, and began working on the lock. Su Ming waited until the right moment, then stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. Going somewhere? The figure froze, turning slowly. For a second, Su Ming saw the surprise flicker in their eyes before they attempted to bolt. But Zhang and the others blocked every exit, leaving the intruder trapped. Upon arrest, they found that this burglar was more than just a thief. They were a member of an underground network, dealing in sensitive information from government offices, trading in secrets as well as stolen goods. The criminal remained silent throughout the interrogation, refusing to answer any questions. The following day, Su Ming presented his findings to the commissioner. "This isn't an ordinary string of burglaries," he explained. "They were gathering sensitive items from specific individuals to create leverage. I suspect we're looking at an organized criminal syndicate, potentially tied to government corruption." The commissioner nodded slowly, impressed by the breadth of Su Ming's insight. "You've managed to uncover something far more significant, Su. This could go deeper than we initially suspected." Su Ming's gaze was steady. "I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface. There's more to uncover, and this syndicate isn't going to stay silent for long." The case had taken an unexpected turn, hinting at a larger, more intricate web of crime that reached far beyond simple theft. As Su Ming walked out of the commissioner's office, he was aware that his quiet life would have to wait. Longshan's shadows were calling him back into their depths. Chapter 57. A Shadow in the Streets. Su Ming's mind churned with the new case details as he made his way home. Each clue suggested that the recent burglary was only the tip of the iceberg. Now, he had a lead pointing toward a possible underground syndicate aiming to shake the stability of the government itself. The audacity of it was remarkable, but he couldn't help but feel a thrill, the excitement of the chase pulling him deeper. The next day, the team gathered early to go over all known syndicates operating in the area. Criminal activity in Longshan had always been complex, but nothing of this scale had surfaced for years. They sat around the room, combing through files on potential suspects. "This symbol left behind, it's unique," Zhang noted, sliding a photo towards Su Ming. "I haven't seen anything like it in our records." Su Ming picked up the photo, observing the strange marking. A double helix symbol with a small, crossed dagger etched on its side. A unique calling card, bold yet mysterious. Whoever was behind these burglaries wanted to be known, or perhaps to send a direct message to the government officials they had targeted. He leaned back, tapping the table thoughtfully. "There's a possibility this isn't just a local syndicate. We could be looking at an international network with a reach into Longshan." The other officers exchanged glances, visibly tense at the thought. "Then we need to tread carefully," Zhang muttered. "A group with that kind of reach is bound to have resources and eyes everywhere." Su Ming spent the next few days analyzing the details of each burglary, compiling profiles of the victims, and tracking possible patterns. The team soon received intel of a significant uptick in transactions on the black market, particularly among artifacts and high-security government documents. Though subtle, it was clear someone was moving sensitive material through illicit channels. One night, as Su Ming dug through the latest report, he received an unexpected call from a contact within his global network. It was rare for anyone to call him directly, as most communications were kept anonymous. He picked up, his tone guarded. "Su, it's been a while," said the voice, low and clear. "Long enough," he replied. "What's the word?" "Your city's not as quiet as it seems. There's chatter from the southern borders about a group attempting to destabilize government officials through coercive means." "Sounds familiar." Su Ming's jaw tightened. So his hunch had been right. This wasn't a local gang. They were up against an international syndicate. Anything else? The contact hesitated before replying. Keep an eye out for a man named Chen Wei. He's known for his connections with groups that specialize in high-level burglary and blackmail. He may have a direct hand in what's happening in Longqin. The next evening, Su Ming joined Zhang and the team in a carefully planned surveillance operation, targeting an upscale warehouse known for hosting black market deals. As they watched from a distance, several luxury cars pulled up, with guards posted around every corner. This meeting was well-funded, with layers of protection to prevent anyone from getting too close. Su Ming observed quietly, his mind racing through the possible scenarios. Chen Wei had yet to show up, but if he was the key to breaking this case open, they couldn't afford to miss him. Moments later, a sleek black car arrived, and a man stepped out, tall and lean, with an air of confidence and arrogance that matched Chen Wei's description. Su Ming signaled to the team, his voice barely above a whisper, "Stay back until we can confirm his identity. Let him make the first move." They watched as Chen Wei entered the warehouse, disappearing into the shadows. For the next half hour, they observed each movement. Figures came and went, and although they couldn't hear the conversations, it was evident that sensitive information and valuable goods were being exchanged. At a calculated moment, Su Ming gave the nod to Zhang, who quietly moved closer to the entrance. They managed to intercept a man leaving with a small briefcase, catching him off guard and retrieving the contents. Inside was a mix of high-level security documents, bearing the insignia of the government. Su Ming glanced at the papers and then at his team, his face set in determination. This is the leverage they're using against officials. We need to move fast before they can expand their operations. The signal went up, and the team converged on the building, sweeping through with precision. Chen Wei managed to slip through the chaos, but they had enough evidence to disrupt the syndicate's operations in Longqin. By the time the police wrapped up, several members had been taken into custody, and a sizable amount of stolen documents had been recovered. Back at the station, Su Ming studied the documents, finding clues that hinted at yet another layer to this scheme. Whoever was behind this syndicate was intelligent. Their strategy was meticulous. Still, he felt a surge of satisfaction at the setback they had caused. As he walked through the bustling precinct later that night, his father caught up with him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I heard you cracked open quite the operation today," he said with a rare smile. "That's my son." Su Ming gave a small nod, though his mind was still racing through possibilities. "This is only the beginning, I think. They'll come back stronger." His father's smile faded, a note of pride in his voice. "Then we'll be ready for them. I know I can count on you, Su Ming." Su Ming felt the weight of his father's words, and for the first time, allowed himself to feel a glimmer of pride. It was moments like these that kept him moving forward, though he wouldn't let his father know how much it meant. Chapter 58. Shadows in the Web. The precinct buzzed with activity following the raid. Evidence was carefully cataloged, and reports flowed steadily. Su Ming spent his hours poring over the confiscated documents, searching for any threads that might lead to Chen Wei or uncover the syndicate's broader plans. His mind worked swiftly, sifting through data points, patterns, and connections. Even as a so-called lazy genius, he was too drawn into this puzzle to look away. As he worked, the phone in his office rang. Su Ming picked it up, expecting Zhang, but it was someone else, one of his contacts from the Global Intelligence Network. Their voice was low and controlled. "There's news from the southern borders," they began. A shipment was intercepted, containing materials meant for Longqin. "Word is the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate was involved." Su Ming's grip on the phone tightened. The Crimson Phoenix Syndicate was no minor player. It was an organization infamous for its complex networks and ruthless operations. They'd left a trail of unsolved crimes across several countries, their members elusive and their identities well hidden. "What was in the shipment?" Su Ming asked, a hint of urgency in his tone. "A mix of encrypted data chips and chemical substances. We think the chemicals are for producing a powerful, controlled substance, new to the market, untraceable by standard methods," the contact replied. "I thought you want to know?" Su Ming thanked them and hung up, his mind now split between two cases: Chen Wei Syndicate and the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate. He had the sinking suspicion that these two were somehow interconnected, and Longchen was at the center of their plans. The next day, Su Ming attended a briefing with his team, updating them on the potential involvement of the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate. He kept his explanation concise, avoiding overloading them with the details he knew through his network. "We're dealing with high-level operatives," he told the team. "They have resources, connections, and a level of organization beyond what we're used to. Our goal now is to track Xinwei and follow him to anyone he's working with." Zhang nodded, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced with a grim expression. "Do we have any leads on where he might have fled?" "We know he slipped past us last night," Su Ming said, flipping through the files. "But he won't stay underground for long. His contacts will lead him to the next target, and we'll be there when he shows himself." As the team discussed the next steps, Su Ming couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something larger was unfolding. This wasn't just about documents or stolen goods. It was a calculated infiltration meant to destabilize the region. Later, Su Ming decided to visit his family's home, hoping for a moment of quiet after the intense week. As he entered, he was greeted by his mother, who immediately noticed the strain in his posture. "Another case, Su Ming?" she asked with a knowing smile. He nodded, offering a small grin in return. "2 cases, both leading to some interesting places." She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You work too hard. Don't forget, sometimes stepping back helps you see more clearly." They sat down together, chatting about simpler topics for a while. The conversation with his mother was a refreshing change from the usual intensity of his work. He felt the weight of her advice and knew it was time to give his mind a brief reprieve, if only to refocus. Just as he was about to leave, his sister, the 5th eldest and a captain in the Special Forces, returned from her deployment. She greeted him with a playful smirk, immediately picking up on his distracted look. "Still playing detective?" she teased, though there was pride in her voice. "Only part-time," he replied, smirking back. "Let me guess. You're here to give me a lecture on tactical awareness?" "Close," she chuckled. "Just remember, even the smallest detail matters. I'll bet you already know that, but hey, it never hurts to hear it twice." Over the next few days, Su Ming put his sister's advice to work, reviewing each piece of evidence carefully. One seemingly insignificant document caught his eye, a coded map buried within the confiscated files. He spent the night decrypting it, only to realize it was a blueprint of Longchen's major government buildings, with specific access points marked in red. A chill ran down his spine. The Crimson Phoenix Syndicate and Chun Wei's organization weren't just after resources or leverage. They were planning a direct attack on the heart of Longchen's political infrastructure. Wasting no time, he gathered his team for an emergency briefing, outlining his findings. The evidence was enough to put the precinct on high alert, as the possibility of a coordinated strike loomed. "We'll need surveillance on every government building," Su Ming directed. Zhang set up a team on high rotation for security checks. "We can't afford to miss anything." As night fell over Longchen, Su Ming found himself alone in his office, staring at the illuminated city skyline. He knew the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate would stop at nothing to accomplish their goals, and if he was right, they were about to make their move soon. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, a text from one of his contacts. It read, "He's resurfaced. Xinwei was spotted at a safe house on the outskirts of Longchen. Move quickly." Su Ming wasted no time. Gathering a small task force, he moved silently through the city, tracking Chunwei's location in a secluded area. The safe house was dimly lit, with armed guards stationed around it. They observed from a distance, assessing the situation. Su Ming weighed the options carefully. Any misstep could alert Xinwei and drive him deeper underground. But he also knew that if they didn't act now, they might lose their chance to stop the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate's plans. "Wait for my signal," he whispered to his team, his voice calm but firm. With precision, they approached the house, slipping past the guards. Su Ming managed to get a clear line of sight on Xinwei, who was speaking with another man, a figure who, based on the intel, seemed to be a high-ranking member of the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate. Su Ming's pulse quickened, but he maintained his composure. They were so close. Every second counted. Now he signaled. The team surged forward, swiftly securing the building. Chun Wei and his contact were apprehended, and taken into custody before they could react. It was a victory, but Su Ming knew the battle was far from over. Chapter 59, Striking at Shadows. The success of the raid brought a brief, but much-needed moment of relief to the precinct. However, even with Chen Wei and his Crimson Phoenix contact in custody, Su Ming felt the undercurrent of tension, a storm that hadn't yet broken. He sensed they were only scratching the surface of a much more elaborate plan. After an intense interrogation, Su Ming sat across from Chen Wei in the cold, dim-lit holding cell. The man, once confident and smug, was now silent, his eyes flickering with a mix of defeat and defiance. Su Ming knew better than to expect easy answers, but he was prepared to chip away at the man's defenses until the truth emerged. Su Ming leaned back, casually crossing his arms, exuding the calm demeanor he was known for. "Tell me, Chen, what was your role in the syndicate's operations? And why Longchen?" Chen Wei smirked slightly, but offered nothing. He seemed to enjoy the standoff as if waiting for Su Ming to lose patience. Su Ming, however, remained unfazed, studying the man's behavior with unblinking focus. After a long silence, Su Ming spoke again, this time with an almost bored tone. I expected a bit more from someone in your position. Maybe I was wrong about you being an important player." Chen Wei's expression flickered with irritation, his pride stung. Su Ming noticed it immediately, a small opening he could work with. He continued subtly provoking Chen Wei's ego, suggesting that the syndicate saw him as expendable, a mere pawn in a much larger game. Finally, Chen Wei's composure cracked. "Expendable? You think they'd let someone expendable get as close as I did?" He spat out almost defensively. Su Ming suppressed a smile, concealing his satisfaction at this reaction. "So, you're saying you were closer to the core of the operation? Interesting. Let's start there." Bit by bit, Chen Wei began to talk, though cautiously, avoiding details that could compromise himself. He mentioned vague references to shipments, encrypted messages, and a sprawling network of hideouts within Longchen and beyond. Despite Chen's attempts to hold back, Su Ming was piecing together valuable information. It was a start, and Su Ming knew he could connect these fragments with his research and contacts. The next day, Su Ming's father, Chief Su, gathered the family at their traditional home. They all sat together, a rare sight given their various duties, and as they shared stories, Su Ming felt a profound sense of calm in the familiar warmth of his family. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, how the weight of the cases had been wearing on him. His eldest sister, a sharp-minded businesswoman, broke the quiet with a playful jab. "Little brother, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. Are they working you too hard?" Su Ming smirked, shrugging nonchalantly. "Nothing I can't handle," he replied, but the exhaustion was clear in his voice. His fifth sister, the Special Forces captain, leaned forward. You can't take on the world alone, right? Maybe share a bit of the load once in a while." Their words warmed him, and he smiled, appreciating the concern. Family gatherings were rare moments when the seriousness of his work faded into the background, replaced by simple, genuine interactions. As the evening wore on, his grandfather, a retired army commander, joined him by the garden. The elder Su's gaze was thoughtful as he spoke. "You're doing well, Su Ming, but remember, cases will always be there. Don't let them consume you. Use the strength that comes from your roots." Su Ming nodded, feeling his grandfather's words sink in. The older man's advice reminded him that he didn't have to bear the weight of every case alone. Returning to work the next morning, Su Ming dove into his analysis, connecting the dots from the information Chen Wei had let slip. His instincts told him that Longchen was being carefully targeted not just for its economic significance, but for its political leverage. A pattern emerged as he sifted through data on recent high-profile burglaries, chemical shipments, and suspicious movements across the city. The Crimson Phoenix Syndicate had been exploiting vulnerable points, targeting not only warehouses but also strategically sensitive areas around governmental buildings. He mapped out each instance, noticing a chilling proximity to Longchen's key institutions. Just as Su Ming was lost in thought, Zhang strolled into the office, dropping a stack of files on the desk. "Got some new intel from one of our informants," he said, sounding unusually serious. "It's about the Crimson Phoenix." Su Ming glanced up, intrigued. "What do we have?" Zhang sat down across from him, his face set with grim determination. "The informant claims the syndicate has plans for a significant hit on the city's water supply. If true, it's a direct threat to millions. The timing is unclear, but it's something we can't ignore." Su Ming's mind raced. Contaminating the water supply would create chaos and undermine public confidence, a tactic that would align perfectly with the syndicate's motives. It was a powerful weapon, one that could shake Longshan to its core. "Do we have locations in mind?" Su Ming asked, already scanning his map of recent syndicate activities. "Some general areas," Zhang replied, pointing to a cluster near the city's industrial sector. "They have connections in the sector, but the details are scarce. They've managed to keep a tight lid on this operation." Su Ming's gaze narrowed as he studied the map. "We need eyes in every corner of that sector. And let's cross-check any suspicious employees in water treatment facilities. If they have insiders, we need to know." Zhang nodded. "We're on it." Su Ming worked late into the night, combing through background reports on the sector and cross-referencing every detail they had on Crimson Phoenix members. As he sifted through files, his mind crafted scenarios, piecing together a defense plan that could counteract the syndicate's potential moves. By dawn, he had devised a strategy: a network of monitoring stations around the industrial sector, backup teams stationed near water treatment facilities, and increased security on chemical storage locations. He knew they would have only one shot at stopping the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate's plot. But as he surveyed his plan, a familiar calm settled over him, the sort of clarity that came from his old life's experiences as a strategist. Su Ming knew his strengths, knew how to anticipate his opponent's moves, and he was ready. Chapter 60. The Syndicate's Shadow. The atmosphere in the precinct was tense, as Su Ming shared the details of the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate's suspected plot with his colleagues. All eyes were on the map he'd prepared, marked with key locations in the industrial sector. His father, Chief Su, stood beside him, silent but visibly troubled by the threat looming over the city. "We're going to run this operation in stages," Su Ming announced to the assembled team. "First, we'll station monitoring units in and around the industrial zones. Second, we'll establish a presence at water treatment facilities and coordinate with the staff to keep our eyes on any suspicious activity." Chief Su nodded approvingly. "Longshan's water supply is a target because it's essential. This won't just be about stopping an attack. It'll be about keeping people calm if they find out what's at risk. So, stay alert and don't overlook any details." Su Ming scanned the faces around him, seeing the determination reflected in each one. The trust and respect they showed him, despite his young age, were both motivating and daunting. He knew that failure wasn't an option here. That evening, Su Ming's plan went into action. Units were stationed, and undercover agents moved discreetly through the industrial sector. Su Ming himself, preferring to stay hands-on, joined one of the monitoring teams near a treatment facility. It was a cold, quiet night, with only the hum of machines and distant city sounds filling the air. But Su Ming knew that quiet was often deceiving. As he scanned the facility perimeter, he considered the possibilities. The syndicate had hidden their plan well, which meant they likely had insiders working for them. It was a complex puzzle, with each piece potentially leading to disaster if not correctly placed. He decided to focus on identifying employees who had joined recently or displayed unusual behavior, hoping to find a connection. Zhang, his partner, joined him on the lookout post. "We've got staff rosters and shift changes for the past month. 3 new employees joined just 2 weeks ago. Security hasn't reported anything strange about them, but it's something." Su Ming looked over the information. "What's their background? Any ties to the syndicate?" "Not directly," Zhang replied, "but one of them worked at a smaller treatment plant in the Western District. It shut down last year after suspicious circumstances. Let's focus on him. If he's involved, he'll know how to stay under the radar." Su Ming's mind went to work. They couldn't afford to wait for a move. They had to anticipate it. Hours passed, and the sky was beginning to lighten. Just as the first rays of dawn crept over the city, a sudden alert came over their communication system. "Unidentified vehicle spotted near the chemical storage facility," a voice crackled through. It's not registered, and the driver bypassed security. Without hesitation, Su Ming and Zhang moved toward the facility, keeping low as they approached. They spotted the vehicle parked at the entrance, a figure stepping out and moving toward one of the storage containers. Su Ming signaled for Zhang to stay back, his sharp gaze trained on the man as he approached. His movements were swift and practiced. He knew exactly where he was going. "Looks like we've got our suspect," Su Ming whispered, signaling for Zhang to contact backup. As they waited, he kept a close watch, noting the man's careful steps. He knew his way around, and he seemed prepared for the facility's layout. A sudden noise broke the silence, a clanging sound from another part of the building. The man paused, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Su Ming knew that a moment of hesitation could make all the difference, and he decided to act. Moving swiftly, Su Ming slipped behind the man, catching him off guard. In one fluid motion, he had him restrained, the man struggling but no match for Su Ming's quick reflexes. Zhang joined him, pulling the man's hands behind his back as backup arrived. The arrest was swift and clean, but it was only the beginning. The man refused to speak, his face set in defiance as they brought him to the station. Su Ming knew they'd have to push hard to break him. Back at the precinct, Su Ming entered the interrogation room. He didn't speak right away, letting the silence stretch until the man shifted uncomfortably. "You were caught red-handed," Su Ming said calmly, pulling out the man's employment record. "And we have your background. Care to explain why you were sneaking around a chemical facility at dawn?" The man's gaze flickered but remained silent. Su Ming leaned forward, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You know, if you don't talk, this could end very badly for you. Or you could help yourself by cooperating." Still, the man held his silence, his jaw clenched. Su Ming sighed, appearing disappointed. "Fine, but let me assure you, we'll find out everything, with or without your help. We know the Crimson Phoenix Syndicate is involved, and we have their plans. So, you're only delaying the inevitable." At the mention of the syndicate, the man's expression shifted, a subtle but telling reaction. Su Ming filed it away, deciding to continue his approach. "You think they care about what happens to you?" Su Ming pressed, his voice low. "You're just a cog in their machine, and when you're no longer useful, they'll leave you to take the fall." The man's resolve began to crack. He shifted in his chair, his gaze faltering as he weighed his options. Finally, in a quiet voice, he said, "I was just supposed to open the storage. Someone else was supposed to finish it." Su Ming kept his satisfaction hidden, nodding slightly. "Who else was involved?" The man hesitated, but, after a tense pause, began to talk. He revealed partial details about the syndicate's chain of command in Longshin and their plans for similar strikes in other areas. Bit by bit, Su Ming pieced together a clearer picture of the syndicate's operations and began to connect it to earlier burglaries and other seemingly random cases. As the case unraveled, Su Ming felt both a sense of victory and an awareness of the battles still to come. He knew that each case would only reveal a fragment of the Crimson Phoenix's network, and their defeat would require patience and cunning. But as he left the precinct, heading toward his family's gathering for the Chinese New Year, he allowed himself a moment of peace. He was greeted warmly by his family, each relative adding to the warmth and laughter filling the room. It was a rare break from the tension of his work, a reminder of why he pursued justice so relentlessly. With a deep breath, Su Ming embraced the festivities, knowing the syndicate could wait a little longer. Here, surrounded by family, he felt ready for whatever came next.